Imagine boarding a transatlantic flight, settling into your first-class seat, and watching the captain himself approach, only to be denied the very premium meal he ordered. That's what happened when Captain Isaiah Thompson, a veteran black pilot with over 20 years of flawless service, found himself facing a subtle yet crushing act of discrimination at 37,000 feet. A tray meant for him was quietly repurposed for an entitled executive, and the cabin's silence spoke volumes. What happens when respect is taken for granted? How does a man who has guided planes through storms and emergencies reclaim his dignity in an environment built on strict hierarchy? And what does it take for a single voice of authority to shatter the status quo, forcing both crew and passengers to confront their own biases? This is not just a story about a denied meal. It's a story about power, prejudice, and the courage it takes to say enough. Over the next 12 chapters, you'll witness how Captain Thompson turns a moment of personal injustice into a lasting stand for respect and integrity. If you're ready to dive into this powerful narrative, hit like, share with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe so you never miss a story that challenges you to look deeper. The champagne flute hit the floor. It didn't just fall, it shattered. Crystal pieces scattered like glittering accusations across the first-class cabin carpet. A hush fell over the aisle, like someone had pulled the oxygen from the air. Passengers turned slowly, eyes scanning the scene, their curiosity morphing into discomfort. Some leaned out of their leather recliners. Others froze, mid-bite or mid-sip, the weight of tension pressing down on them harder than any turbulence. Captain Isaiah Thompson stood near the front galley, not moving, not blinking, in his perfectly tailored Navy uniform with gold stripes gleaming on each shoulder. He looked like he had stepped out of a flight training manual. But his eyes told another story. Not anger, not yet. Something deeper, older, like a furnace long burning beneath layers of patience. The flight attendant, who had just refused him the premium crew meal, a meal he had ordered before boarding, was staring back at him. Lips parted, but silent. Olivia Barnes. Her voice had been crisp, professional, but firm in a way that had felt personal. "I'm sorry, Captain. Those are reserved for our first-class passengers," she had said. He had stood there, tray still in her hand, other flight attendants looking away. Even First Officer Marcus Ellis, sitting quietly in the cockpit just feet away, had glanced out with concern. And then Davis Carrington spoke. From his luxurious seat in 2A, the Northern Jet Airlines chief operating officer leaned back with a smirk and said, loud enough for nearby passengers to hear, "Captain or not, there's a chain of command on every plane. And we all know who sets the menu." That's when the glass slipped from Lily Tran's hand. She had tried to serve him a drink to de-escalate the moment. Nervous hands, not her fault. But in that moment, that crash echoed through the cabin louder than takeoff. It was no longer about meals, no longer about protocol. It was about power. It was about respect. And it was about how fast one man's restraint could be pushed before it turned into something more permanent. Isaiah took one slow breath in through his nose. Then, with a voice that had guided flights through hurricanes, mechanical failures, and transatlantic emergencies, he spoke, calmly, clearly, to the entire cabin. "In 10 minutes, he said, none of you will be working for this airline." His voice was deep, smooth, no tremble, no shout, just a promise. Olivia's eyebrows twitched. Chad Simmons, another flight attendant near the galley, stepped forward like he might say something, then stopped. Everyone froze, except Davis Carrington, who let out a single dry laugh. "Is that so?" he said, raising an eyebrow. Isaiah didn't answer. Didn't need to. He turned, walking back toward the cockpit. The rubber soles of his polished black shoes made no sound, but every eye tracked him. Every breath waited for the next move. Back in the cockpit, Marcus swiveled in his chair. He looked up, uncertain. Captain Isaiah sat slowly in the left seat. "We have a developing issue," he said. Marcus nodded slowly. "She said no to the meal. She said no to more than that." Isaiah looked straight ahead, out the glass windows. At the clouds they were cutting through at 38,000 feet. He could see the horizon, the line where Earth disappeared into sky. He had spent his life navigating between those two worlds. And even up here, prejudice still followed. Even in a pressurized cabin hurtling through space, it still found him. "Are you filing an in-flight report?" Marcus asked carefully. Isaiah didn't respond immediately. His hands hovered above the flight panel like a pianist, unsure which keys to strike. Marcus didn't push. The silence between them was heavy, but not hostile. Marcus was young, still learning. And until today, he hadn't seen this version of Isaiah Thompson, the one who had learned how to take insult without reaction, how to turn dignity into armor. The intercom light flicked on. Isaiah didn't press it. Not yet. He turned to Marcus and said quietly, "Get me the ethics hotline frequency. Secure channel." Marcus's eyebrows raised, but he followed the order. Back in first class, the silence was beginning to crack. Passengers whispered. Olivia stepped away, into the galley, where she could breathe. Lily was still staring at the shards of glass. Chad whispered to Olivia, "He's bluffing. He doesn't have that kind of authority." Olivia swallowed hard. "What if he does? He's just a pilot," Chad muttered. But Olivia didn't respond, because part of her wasn't so sure anymore. And in seat 2A, Davis Carrington reached for another drink, his smirk still glued to his face, because he believed in hierarchy. He believed in power. He believed the world worked a certain way, and that men like Captain Isaiah Thompson only got so far before hitting the ceiling. But what Davis didn't know, what no one else knew, was that Isaiah had been hitting that ceiling his entire career. And tonight, he wasn't ducking anymore. The sliding doors of Terminal 4 hissed open, letting in a blast of cool, recycled airport air. Captain Isaiah Thompson rolled his overnight bag behind him, its wheels whispering across the polished tile of JFK International's crew entrance. The lanyard badge around his neck bounced lightly against his chest, the golden wings on his navy blazer catching a glint of morning sun through the high windows. It was 5:17 a.m., 3 hours before Flight 701 to Munich was scheduled to depart. He moved with unhurried purpose, the kind of rhythm earned through decades of repetition. Security check, crew elevator, briefing room, scan badge, smile politely, shake a few hands. 27 years in the industry had smoothed everything down to muscle memory. He nodded at a few other pilots heading in for their own flights. A couple recognized him. Some greeted him by name. Others nodded with that subtle acknowledgement between aviators' mutual respect forged at cruising altitude. But Isaiah was deep in thought. His mind wandered to a small townhouse in Queens, the one with the navy blue shutters his late wife insisted they paint together every spring. This would have been their 29th anniversary. Instead, he was texting his daughter Simone. She was in her junior year at Howard University, pre-med. He typed, "Wheels up to Munich today. Be kind to yourself this week. Call me after your physiology class." A few seconds later, the read receipt popped up. Then the reply, "You'll fly the plane. I'll fix the people. Love you. Dad." He smiled. The phone buzzed again, this time with a message from dispatch. Crew adjustment F.O. Mason reassigned, replacing with Marcus Ellis, ID 4845. Isaiah blinked. He hadn't flown with Marcus before. He tapped into the internal portal, pulling up Marcus's file. 32, graduated Embry-Riddle. 2 years with a regional carrier before coming to Northern Jet. No prior complaints, no exceptional marks either. He was still climbing, still figuring out his own wings. Isaiah sighed softly, pocketed his phone, and entered the briefing room. The hum of pre-flight activity buzzed low across the room. Crew were scattered in small groups, some sipping coffee, others scrolling phones, others reviewing flight manifests on tablets. He scanned for the cabin crew assigned to his flight. There, Olivia Barnes, lead flight attendant, sharp haircut, sharper eyes, mid-40s, always crisp in uniform, known for running a tight ship. He'd worked with her before. She was efficient, no nonsense, polite on the surface but cool underneath. Beside her was Chad Simmons, tall and broad-shouldered, with that too-casual confidence that some crew never seemed to outgrow. Isaiah didn't know him well, but he'd heard things. The last was a new face, young, early 20s, Asian American, quiet posture, nervous hands folding and unfolding her tablet case. He would learn later her name was Lily Tran. As he approached, Olivia glanced up and gave a professional nod. "Captain Thompson," she said. "Morning." "Olivia," he replied with a slight smile. "Looks like we've got a full house today." She tapped her tablet. "Completely booked. First, and business sold out. Coach over capacity. It's going to be a long one." He raised an eyebrow. "Anyone I should be aware of?" Olivia hesitated a beat, then said, "Richard Dalton is aboard." Isaiah felt his stomach tighten for just a moment. Richard Dalton, Chief Operating Officer, one of the highest-ranking executives in the airline, known for slashing costs and pushing traditional values. Isaiah had met him twice. Both times were memorable for the wrong reasons. "What seat?" he asked. "2A, noted," before Olivia could say more. The door opened and Marcus Ellis stepped in, clean-shaven, boyish, with a stiff posture that said, "I'm trying to do everything right." He spotted Isaiah and immediately made his way over. "Captain Thompson," he said, extending a hand. Isaiah shook it firmly. "Morning. First Officer Ellis. Welcome aboard." "An honor to fly with you, sir," Marcus said. "I've read some of your route analyses for the Atlantic crossings. Brilliant stuff." Isaiah chuckled gently. "You read my reports. You might be the first." Marcus flushed a little. "I like learning from the veterans." Isaiah nodded. "Good. You'll be tested today. Long haul, tight manifest, and a senior executive in the mix." "I'm ready," Marcus said quickly. Isaiah gave him a measured look. "We'll see." They broke for the crew briefing. Weather was clear over the Atlantic. Expected turbulence over southern Greenland. Cruise altitude set at 37,000 to start, with potential climb to 39,000 if the jet stream dipped. Nothing unusual. The kind of flight that should be textbook, until it wasn't. As they finished the checklist, Isaiah caught Chad whispering something to Olivia and laughing under his breath. Olivia didn't respond, but her mouth twitched. Isaiah let it go. For now. The crew filed toward the aircraft. Flight 701, a Boeing 787 Dreamliner. Sleek, efficient, elegant. A machine built for endurance and beauty at once. Isaiah stepped into the cockpit, inhaling the faint scent of fresh upholstery and sterilized metal. He took his seat in the left chair, the captain's seat. Marcus settled beside him, placing his flight bag carefully under his console. Isaiah moved through the pre-flight inspection slowly, deliberately, checking every display, every switch, every value with the patience of a man who still respected the sky. Outside, the first rays of sun stretched across the tarmac. Passengers were beginning to board. He heard the distant greetings of the flight attendants, the cheerful tones they used like armor. He stood up once the systems were green. "I like to greet the first-class cabin," Isaiah told Marcus. "Gives them a face to the voice." Marcus nodded. "Old school." Isaiah smiled. Sometimes old school still works. He stepped into the cabin. Soft piano music played overhead. The lighting was warm, and there in seat 2A, Richard Dalton was already reclined, reading a Wall Street Journal with one AirPod in. He looked up, and his expression shifted. "Oh," Dalton said, not quite smiling. "Didn't realize you'd be flying today." Isaiah nodded. "Mr. Dalton." Always a pleasure to have leadership on board. Dalton didn't rise, didn't offer a handshake, just said, "Glad to see the company embracing diversity in all departments." It was the kind of line that wore a mask of praise but held a dagger underneath. Isaiah had heard it too many times before. "The company benefits from many perspectives," he replied smoothly. "Let us know if there's anything you need." As he moved to greet other passengers, he saw Olivia watching from the galley, her expression unreadable. He returned to the cockpit, closed the door, and sat. Marcus looked over. "Everything all right?" Isaiah nodded once, but inside, he felt the turbulence beginning. Not in the sky, in the cabin. And this time, it wasn't going to be weather they had to navigate. It would be something colder, something louder, and far more dangerous. The boarding process had begun. The line at the jet bridge was already snaking back toward the gate. Business travelers clutching briefcases, families juggling strollers and passports, headphones slipping over necks, coffees half drunk and full of heat. The familiar chaos hummed like background music, orchestrated by repetition and routine. Isaiah watched from the cockpit for a moment, hands resting calmly on his thighs. He could hear Olivia's voice echoing from the front, polished and precise, announcing boarding groups with airline-grade cheerfulness. Chad's laugh followed, slightly louder than necessary, and then Lily's softer voice, quieter and less rehearsed. Marcus looked over. "Do you always do a walk-through before pushback?" Isaiah gave a small nod. "I like to feel the cabin. Make sure the crew's aligned. Catch the small things before they become big things." Marcus leaned back slightly. "Smart. Most captains just stay in here and bark from behind the door." "I fly the plane," Isaiah replied. "But I fly with people." He stood and stepped out into the aisle, adjusting the buttons on his uniform jacket. As he approached first class, he nodded to passengers already seated. A middle-aged couple thanked him for the welcome. A college student barely looked up from her phone. Richard Dalton was now sipping something brown from a heavy crystal glass. He didn't say a word when Isaiah passed. Isaiah moved on, pausing by the front galley where Olivia and Chad were tidying up the service trays. Olivia glanced at him briefly, then turned back to her tablet. Chad, however, smiled wide. "Smooth takeoff window today, Captain," he said, placing plastic stirrers into a drawer. "Assuming the headwinds don't turn political." Isaiah's eyebrows twitched. "I beg your pardon," Chad chuckled. "Nothing. Just saying with Mr. Dalton on board, things can get hierarchical." Olivia shot him a sharp look, but said nothing. Isaiah studied Chad's face for a beat longer than necessary, then turned to Olivia. "Let me know if anything needs adjusting before pushback," he said evenly. She nodded. "Yes, Captain." There was a tightness in her voice, barely perceptible, but Isaiah had trained himself to listen for what was not said. And what was not said hung in the air now, like static just before a storm. He continued down the aisle toward business class. Lily was there, assisting an elderly woman with her carry-on. She noticed him and straightened instantly. "Captain," she said quietly. "Do you need something, no?" He said gently. "Just doing my rounds." She hesitated. Then, a touch of color rising in her cheeks, she added, "It's an honor to fly with you." Isaiah gave a small nod. "Thank you. That means a lot." He returned to the cockpit, settled back into his seat, and closed the door. Marcus glanced over. "Anything?" "Not yet," Isaiah said, "but something's off." Dalton Isaiah gave a half smile. "He's never just a passenger. He's a test of who we are when someone's watching." Marcus nodded, not quite understanding, but respecting the tone. As boarding continued, the chatter on the radio grew steady. Gate agents hustled final passengers aboard. Flight attendants checked overhead bins, offered drinks, closed compartments. Chad joked with a group of businessmen in row 3. Olivia reminded a child not to kick the seat ahead of him. Lily handed tissues to a woman already sniffling from takeoff nerves. To the untrained eye, everything looked normal. To Isaiah, it felt rehearsed. He pulled up the flight manifest on his screen, scrolling through passenger names. There it was, Dalton, Richard A., Seat 2A, Priority 1 status, 4 companions in tow. He noticed a familiar name in Seat 1C, Zoe Landry. He blinked. Zoe Landry was a journalist. Not just any journalist. A high-profile investigative reporter who had recently gone quiet after her expose on corruption within a major pharmaceutical chain. Some said she was traveling under the radar. Others said she was on the verge of another story. Isaiah glanced up toward first class. Zoe was wearing a soft beige sweater, dark jeans, and oversized glasses. She looked nothing like her press photos, but she was watching everything. Everything. The boarding door closed with a final thud. The flight attendants ran through their checks. Olivia walked down the aisle with practiced grace, nodding once to Isaiah as she passed. Chad lingered near Dalton, who was now swirling his drink like a man about to make a toast. Lily finished checking seat belts and ducked back into the rear galley. The engine hum deepened as the auxiliary power unit gave way to the main turbines. Isaiah spoke into the PA system, his voice deep and measured. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain. Welcome aboard Northern Jet Flight 701 nonstop service to Munich. We're expecting a smooth ride today. Once in the air, I'll update you on cruising altitude and weather conditions. In the meantime, sit back, relax, and thank you for flying with us." He clicked off the mic and looked at Marcus. Pre-taxi checklist complete, pushback clearance received, gate 52 released. Isaiah reached forward, his hands moving in quiet rhythm. Outside, the aircraft began to ease away from the terminal, a gentle glide backward, guided by the tug vehicle at the nose. The Dreamliner was alive now. It was always the same moment, right after disconnect, when the plane truly became theirs. As they began to taxi toward runway 22R, Isaiah felt the familiar shift in energy. The aircraft rolled slowly past rows of parked jets. The city skyline still hovered in early morning haze. He watched the tower lights blink green. Then came the voice. "Northern Jet, 701. You're number 3 for departure. Expect delay of 3 minutes. Copy that," Marcus replied. Isaiah turned to his side panel and quietly activated the crew intercom. "Olivia," he said, "flight deck here. Cabin secure." Her voice returned quickly. "Cabin is secure, Captain. All seated. Thank you." As he clicked off, Marcus glanced over. "You always this thorough. I'm responsible for 290 lives," Isaiah replied. "Thorough is the floor, not the ceiling." Marcus smiled faintly. He was starting to get it. They reached the threshold of 22R. "Hold short." The roar of a 737 lifting off ahead rumbled through the fuselage. Then came their turn. Isaiah gently pushed forward the throttles. "Let's fly." The plane accelerated, smooth and relentless. Lift, rotation, gear up, flaps up, climb initiated. New York dropped beneath them like a postcard folding shut. At 12,000 feet, Isaiah called for standard turn eastward. Clouds shimmered like broken glass across the sky. Marcus managed the headings while Isaiah checked system health. Then silence. Just the quiet hum of the jet. The world below growing smaller. But Isaiah's thoughts didn't shrink. They were expanding. To the cabin. To the faces. To the remarks that weren't quite jokes. To the smiles that didn't quite reach the eyes. To Dalton in 2A, sipping his second drink with the posture of someone who believed no rules applied to him. Isaiah exhaled slowly. "We're not above anything," he whispered. "Not even up here." 37,000 feet above the Atlantic Ocean. The world outside the aircraft curved gently toward the edges of space. The sky deepened into a darker blue, almost indigo, the clouds beneath casting shadows across the ocean like delicate folds in silk. Inside the cockpit of Northern Jet Flight 701, everything was calm. Almost too calm. Isaiah sat quietly in the left seat, watching the instruments flick by with slow rhythm. His hands rested on his thighs. Fingers curled slightly. Not tense, but not relaxed either. His face was neutral, but something in the way he breathed said otherwise. Marcus handled the radios and occasional headings from air traffic control. He worked efficiently, eager to prove himself. Occasionally he glanced sideways, but didn't speak unless necessary. When he did speak, it was cautious. "So," Marcus said finally, during a lull in the radio chatter, "do you think Dalton will stay quiet the whole flight?" Isaiah's jaw flexed once. "He'll speak when it benefits him," Isaiah said. "He's not the kind of man who waits without a motive." Marcus nodded slowly, unsure how far to follow that thought. "I've only seen him once," Marcus said, "at a corporate event last year. He gave this talk about realignment and cost efficiency. Said some pretty intense things about employee loyalty and modern hiring standards." Isaiah glanced at him. What kind of things? Marcus shifted. Something about how pilots today need more emotional compatibility than perfect qualifications. A lot of people laughed. Some clapped. I think it was a joke. But he trailed off. Isaiah understood what Marcus wasn't saying. You can only hear so many jokes about who belongs in your seat before they stop being jokes. After a pause, Isaiah said quietly, "Sometimes people wear professionalism like a mask. But if you listen carefully, you can still hear what they believe underneath." They flew in silence for a while after that. Outside, the curvature of the earth was more visible now. The plane coasted above the cloud ceiling, untouched by turbulence. Isaiah closed his eyes for a moment. His thoughts drifted. To a moment 10 years ago. Another cockpit, another co-pilot, another joke. That time it was about his name, about how Isaiah sounded more like a gospel singer than a pilot. The man who said it thought it was funny. Their flight attendant had laughed. Isaiah had smiled politely. The laughter echoed in his ears long after they landed. He'd been told his whole career to let things go. That professionalism meant silence. That strength meant tolerance. But the older he got, the heavier the silence became. He opened his eyes again. The call button pinged from the main panel. First class. Isaiah pressed the intercom. Flight deck. Olivia's voice came through, smooth and businesslike. Captain, just letting you know we're beginning first service. All is normal so far. Thank you. He clicked off, but something in her tone caught him. It was too flat, too practiced. He knew that tone. It was the voice of someone trying not to show cracks. He turned to Marcus. I'll step back for a moment. You have the aircraft. I have the aircraft. Marcus confirmed. Isaiah unbuckled and stepped out of the cockpit, making his way toward the galley at the front of the plane. He passed the first few rows of first class. Dalton had reclined his seat slightly, still sipping, still flipping through his tablet like the aircraft was a personal extension of his office. Zoe Landry's eyes tracked him as he passed. She didn't speak, just nodded once. Isaiah paused just outside the galley. Olivia and Chad were arranging drink trays, loading wine glasses into silver trolleys. Neither looked surprised to see him. How's the service going? Isaiah asked casually. Smooth, Olivia replied, not looking up from her cart. We'll have all cabins served on schedule. Any issues I should be aware of, she said again, too quickly. Chad smirked. Dalton's just being Dalton. Wants a second helping of everything and his drink refilled before he finishes the first. Isaiah tilted his head slightly. Has he made any inappropriate requests? Chad shrugged. Nothing you'd write up, just assertive. Isaiah turned his attention to Olivia. She finally looked at him, eyes calm but tired. No formal complaints, Captain, she said. But something in her gaze was pleading, or trapped. It was hard to tell which. Isaiah gave a slow nod. If anything changes, let me know immediately. Discreetly. She nodded, then he turned to go. But before he left, Lily appeared from the side aisle. She had a tray in her hands, but her eyes flicked up as she nearly bumped into him. Captain, she said softly. Isaiah stepped aside, and she quickly ducked past. But her cheeks were flushed, her shoulders tight. She hadn't said anything in the galley, but something was bothering her. Isaiah returned to the cockpit. Marcus looked up. Everything okay? Isaiah sat down, adjusted his headset, buckled in. For now. He glanced at the clock. Still 5 hours to go. They passed into the oceanic airspace soon after, handed off to Gander Control. The flight continued, steady as ever, but beneath the hum of the engines, beneath the flicker of cabin service and the sterile lighting, something else was shifting. Unspoken lines were being drawn, invisible boundaries crossed. And Isaiah could feel the weight of it pressing closer. Dalton was just one man, one seat, one voice, but that voice carried with it an entire system, one that had judged him, doubted him, and watched him for decades. The meal issue hadn't come up yet, but Isaiah already knew. When it did, it wouldn't just be a question of preference. It would be a question of principle. And when that moment came, he would need to decide whether silence was still the price of peace, or whether this time the turbulence had to come. The hum of the Dreamliner drifted through the cabin like white noise. Passengers were settling into the long cruise phase. Screens lit up with movies. The smell of reheated pasta and seared beef wafted from the galleys. First class had already begun its first service. Wine flowed, laughter in hushed tones, comfort in controlled doses. Isaiah sat in the cockpit, eyes scanning the digital displays. Systems were stable, engine performance within expected range, altitude locked at 37,000 feet, speed holding steady, all routine. He tapped into the crew message system and opened the catering file. Meal orders were logged. As a senior captain, Isaiah had long-standing arrangements with the in-flight services team. He didn't often request special treatment, but when he was flying transatlantic red-eyes, he preferred one of the premium crew meals lighter, better quality, closer to first-class standard. It was a small courtesy, long honored, nothing that had ever caused conflict. He keyed in the request, double-checked that it had been submitted pre-flight, and sent the internal message to the front galley. A simple note, meal ready when convenient. Thank you. He leaned back, removed his headset, and stretched his fingers. Hungry? Marcus asked. Isaiah gave a half smile. It's more about rhythm than appetite. Eating on schedule helps with time zones. Marcus nodded. Makes sense. I'll probably wait until coach service starts. I usually just nibble on almonds for 6 hours. Isaiah chuckled softly. You'll burn out quick on almonds. The intercom clicked. It was Olivia. Captain, your meal is being prepared. I'll have it shortly. Her tone was neutral. Professional. Maybe too professional. 10 minutes later, the cockpit door clicked open. Olivia entered with the tray. Isaiah looked up and immediately noticed something was wrong. Her posture was stiff, eyes too steady. She placed the tray down gently on the fold-out table in front of him. On it was a standard crew meal pasta in a foil container, a small roll, and a cookie in plastic wrap. No salad, no premium entree, no warm plating, no fruit. Isaiah glanced at it, then back at Olivia. Is this the substitute? He asked calmly. She hesitated. The premium meals were reserved for first class. There were none left after service. Isaiah's eyes narrowed slightly, but his voice remained low. My request was filed before boarding. The system shows confirmation. I understand, Captain, she said, but the manifest showed 12 premium meals. All 12 were served to passengers. Isaiah said nothing. He reached over, tapped a few keys, and pulled up the meal count log. 12. 3 listed for crew allocation. His voice barely rose above a whisper. There were 3 crew-set meals aside from the passenger count. Where did those go? Olivia didn't blink. They were distributed. Distributed where Chad's voice chimed in from behind her, just outside the cockpit doorway. I took one, he said casually. Dalton asked for another. Wanted to compare entrees. Olivia gave him the last one. Isaiah turned his head slowly. His eyes locked onto Chad's face. Dalton is not crew, Isaiah said. He's the COO, Chad replied with a slight smirk. If the man wants a second meal, we give it. It's called courtesy. Isaiah stared at him. For 1 second, 2, then 3. He turned back to Olivia. I asked for that meal 12 hours ago. It was logged and confirmed. Instead, I've been given a tray that wasn't even part of the request. Olivia didn't answer right away. Isaiah waited. Captain, she said finally, we're just following the service priorities. Isaiah's jaw clenched once, then relaxed. He reached for the tray, slid it gently toward him, and closed the table. Understood, he said. No anger, no raised voice, but the chill in the air was unmistakable. As Olivia exited, Marcus let out a slow exhale. That was awkward. Isaiah didn't respond right away. He opened the water bottle on the tray and took a single sip, then set it aside. He leaned back, looking straight ahead. In his mind, the silence was louder than the engines. He wasn't angry about the meal, not really. He was angry about the message, the quiet reordering of respect. The decision made somewhere between Chad's smirk and Olivia's silence that said even up here, in the seat he had earned with 22 years of flight hours, he was still expected to accept less, still expected to swallow it, and thank them for the crumbs. A soft knock came at the cockpit door 15 minutes later. It was Lily. Her voice was hesitant. "Captain, come in." She stepped inside, holding a small covered container. "Mr. Dalton didn't want the second entree. He changed his mind. I thought maybe you—" Her words trailed off. Isaiah looked at the tray in her hands. It was the premium meal. Grilled chicken, couscous, roasted vegetables, and fresh fruit. He didn't move. Lily stood there, awkward, unsure. "I saw what happened," she said. "I know it wasn't fair." Isaiah's gaze softened slightly. He reached out and took the tray. "Thank you," he said. Lily hesitated, then added, "I didn't know if I should say anything, but it felt wrong." Isaiah nodded slowly. Sometimes doing the small right thing matters more than silence. Lily nodded, then backed out of the cockpit. Marcus said nothing. He looked out the window, pretending to be busy, but Isaiah could feel the tension swirling like jet stream outside the fuselage, down in first class. Dalton sipped a fresh glass of bourbon, oblivious or indifferent. Chad was laughing with another passenger. Olivia moved like clockwork, but there was a stiffness in her gait. Isaiah placed the new meal on the side console. He didn't eat. He just stared at it, like it was a symbol, not of food, but of lines that had been crossed, and of the ones he had drawn years ago, lines that could no longer be ignored. The overhead lights dimmed as the Dreamliner entered the darker band of transatlantic sky. Most passengers were reclining now, eyes closed, blankets pulled up to shoulders. Cabin noise had softened to a low ambient hum, interrupted only by the occasional clink of glassware or the shuffle of a crew member's footsteps. But in seat 2A, Richard Dalton was wide awake, and getting louder. He had already finished his fourth glass of bourbon, though no one had kept official count. His voice floated through the cabin like static dry, clipped, and just on the edge of condescension. Isaiah didn't need to be there to feel it. He knew the type. He had flown the type. Men who confused rank with virtue. Men who believed politeness was owed to them, but not required from them. Men who believed the world was better when they controlled the rules, and worse when they had to follow someone else's. In the cockpit, Isaiah kept his eyes on the displays, but his thoughts were drifting again, not aimlessly. They circled around the slow burn of the day, the missed meal, the way Olivia had avoided eye contact afterward, the look in Chad's eyes like he had won something. Even Marcus had fallen quieter. He wasn't to blame. He was still learning where the unspoken lines were drawn. The cabin intercom pinged again. It was Olivia. "Captain," she said, her voice strained but composed. "We've had a passenger request an unscheduled refill. It's Mr. Dalton. He insists—" Isaiah kept his voice calm. "How many has he had?" "More than the recommended limit," Olivia replied. Isaiah waited one beat before responding. "Do not serve him another drink until we're 3 hours from descent." There was a pause. Then she replied, "Understood, Captain." Isaiah leaned back in his chair. The air inside the cockpit was cool, but his skin felt warm. This wasn't about alcohol. This was about control. Dalton was pushing boundaries the same way he always had, from a boardroom to an airplane aisle. Except this time, Isaiah was the highest authority on board. That mattered, and Dalton didn't like that. 10 minutes passed, then 15. Another ping. This time it wasn't Olivia. It was Lily. Her voice was nervous. "Captain, Mr. Dalton has come to the galley. He's demanding another drink." Olivia tried to redirect him to his seat, but he raised his voice. Isaiah closed his eyes, and for a moment, the image returned. A memory of a younger Isaiah, still first officer, still trying to prove himself, being shouted at by a senator who had missed a connecting flight and blamed the crew. His captain at the time had said nothing, had shrugged, had laughed with the senator afterward, and Isaiah had stood there, uniform neat, hands folded, enduring it. That was the day he swore that if he ever became captain, he would never let silence speak louder than dignity. He pressed the intercom button. "Lily," he said, "escort Mr. Dalton back to his seat. If he refuses, inform him that the captain has issued a behavioral warning. That will be his only one." There was a pause, then a soft, "Yes, Captain." Marcus looked over from the right seat. "Want me to handle it?" Isaiah shook his head slowly. "Not yet, but keep your comms open." 3 minutes passed, then 5. Then the cockpit door pinged again. Olivia entered. She looked tired. Her posture was beginning to sag under the weight of false neutrality. "He said he wants to speak to you," she said. Isaiah did not move. He said, quote, "I don't take orders from employees who weren't born to lead." Marcus flinched. Isaiah did not. Instead, he looked at Olivia carefully. "What did you say to him?" She hesitated. "I reminded him of FAA protocol. I reminded him that your authority supersedes all personnel on board." Isaiah raised an eyebrow, and she hesitated again. "I also told him I would follow up with corporate once we land." Isaiah gave a slow nod. "Thank you. That'll be all for now." She turned to leave, but paused at the door. Then she looked over her shoulder. "I know this isn't the first time you've dealt with this," she said quietly. "No," Isaiah replied, "but it might be the last." She held his gaze for a second longer, then exited. Isaiah didn't say anything for a while. Neither did Marcus. Then Marcus spoke. "That was direct." Isaiah gave a short breath. "I've let too many things go for too long." He turned back to the controls. "We're halfway to Munich. Another 4 hours of airspace, and then ground, and then fallout." Marcus tapped a few switches, then asked, "What happens if he makes a scene?" Isaiah didn't hesitate. "Then I file a full incident report, and I notify the destination port authorities to meet the aircraft." Marcus nodded, and that was it. The cockpit returned to quiet, but the tension had spread, back in first class. Dalton was grumbling loudly to the man seated behind him. "She's lucky to be on this flight at all," he said. "I could have her reassigned by morning." It wasn't clear if he meant Olivia, or Lily, or even Isaiah. The passenger behind him stayed quiet, but Zoe Landry wasn't. She leaned forward from her seat in 1C, softly, coolly. "Is that a threat?" "Mr. Dalton turned, eyes narrowed. "Excuse me." Zoe looked him in the eye. Her voice was level. "I just want to make sure I understand what you're implying." Dalton studied her, then realized who she was. "Wait. You're the reporter." Zoe gave a small smile. "Correct." Dalton scoffed. "This is a private conversation." "No," Zoe said. "This is a public cabin, on a public flight, with witnesses." Dalton opened his mouth, then closed it. The silence was louder than any rebuttal. Lily, watching from the galley, didn't move, but her fingers curled tighter around the handle of her cart, inside the cockpit. Isaiah adjusted their flight path by 1 degree to account for a small jet stream drift. It was nothing serious, but he was grateful for the excuse to focus on precision. His heart was calm, but the decision was forming in him like slow heat. He would not walk off this plane with another unfiled report. He would not walk off this plane pretending everything had been normal. The disrespect had grown into something undeniable. And soon, the next move would be his. The cabin felt heavier now, not in turbulence, but in atmosphere. It was the kind of weight people couldn't name, but still felt, like the pressure that settles before a thunderstorm. Something in the air that made everyone sit a little straighter. Speak a little softer. Look up a little more often. Isaiah could feel it even from the cockpit. The plane was steady, altitude smooth, engines humming like distant wind, but the air inside the cabin was getting thick. He stared at the flight panel, checked fuel burn, cross-referenced their position. Nothing out of order. Still, his gut said otherwise. He tapped the crew intercom. Status check. Olivia. Report. Her voice came back. Tight. We're beginning second service. Mr. Dalton has refused to remain seated. He claims the seat controls are malfunctioning and is currently in the aisle near the front galley. Isaiah paused. Has he made contact with crew? No physical contact. Verbal escalation only. Passengers nearby are growing uncomfortable. That was enough. Isaiah stood. I have the aircraft, he told Marcus. Marcus turned, concern rising behind his eyes. I have the aircraft, Marcus repeated. Isaiah opened the cockpit door and stepped into the hallway between the galley and the first row. Dalton was there, standing next to a half-open cabinet, holding a glass. His voice was raised now. I said I asked for a blanket 15 minutes ago. Is it that hard to find basic service on a premium flight? Chad stood nearby, looking helpless. Olivia was trying to reason with him, but her voice was soft, cautious. Zoe Landry sat upright in her seat. She wasn't pretending to be asleep anymore. Lily was nowhere in sight. Dalton turned just as Isaiah approached, and for a moment he smiled. But it wasn't kind. It was the kind of smile that expected to win. Captain, Dalton said, nice of you to join us. Isaiah kept his voice even. Sir, please return to your seat. Dalton chuckled. Is that an order? Yes, Isaiah said, and it is not optional. Dalton took a sip of his drink. Funny thing about power, he said. People think they have it because they wear stripes. Isaiah took one step forward. You are interfering with crew operations and passenger comfort. This is your final warning. Return to your seat or be formally documented for misconduct under FIA regulations. Dalton stared at him. Then he leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. I know who you are, he said, and I know how quickly careers like yours can be rerouted. Think carefully about what hill you want to die on. Isaiah said nothing, but he looked at Dalton, truly looked, and what he saw was not strength, not control, but fear. The fear of someone who had spent too long at the top, worried someone below might rise high enough to look him in the eye. Isaiah spoke clearly, calmly. This is not about hills. This is about altitude. And right now, you are sinking. For a moment, the silence stretched so tight it might snap. Then Zoe spoke from her seat. Captain, she said, for the record, I've witnessed this passenger verbally harass 3 crew members and disrupt service for the entire cabin. I'm willing to document my statement. Dalton turned sharply toward her. You stay out of this. Zoe raised an eyebrow. That's the second threat you've made in less than an hour. Another passenger behind her, a man in a business suit, looked up from his laptop. "She's not wrong," he said. A few murmurs followed from the cabin. Olivia looked stunned. Chad froze. Dalton's mask was cracking. "I will see to it this airline never forgets this moment," he said through gritted teeth. Isaiah didn't blink. "You're right," he said. "They won't." He turned to Olivia. "Secure the galley. Mr. Dalton is to be seated and monitored for the remainder of the flight. Document all further interactions. If he leaves his seat again, he will be restrained." Chad finally spoke. "You can't be serious." Isaiah turned to him. "Do you have an objection to enforcing FAA protocol?" Chad stammered. "I just think maybe we're escalating." Isaiah nodded slowly. "I agree." The escalation happened the moment crew started prioritizing executive preference over standard procedure. This is a correction. The air in the galley shifted. Lily appeared again, holding a passenger meal tray. Her hands were shaking slightly, but her eyes were steady. Dalton looked around, at Zoe, at the passengers watching him, then at Isaiah, and for the first time, he looked small, not because of height, not because of rank, but because he had finally hit something that didn't move when he pushed. He stepped back into his row, slammed into his seat, crossed his arms, said nothing. Isaiah turned to Olivia again. "Resuming normal service. I'll be filing a full incident report with in-flight operations before landing." "Yes, Captain," she said. Her voice was stronger now. Chad stepped back. Didn't speak. Isaiah returned to the cockpit. Sat down. Closed the door. Marcus looked at him. "You handled that with more grace than I would have." Isaiah adjusted his headset. "I wasn't interested in grace. I was interested in clarity." Marcus nodded. "You got that." Isaiah stared ahead, out into the night sky, stars blinking beyond the glass, and inside, a feeling he hadn't touched in a long time. Not anger, not vindication, but quiet certainty. He hadn't just protected a flight. He had protected his line, the one he had drawn not with words, but with years of silence that no longer served him. From now on, he would not let dignity be mistaken for weakness. Not in this cockpit, not in this cabin, not ever again. The cabin was quiet, too quiet. After the confrontation, after Dalton's reluctant retreat to his seat, there was a stillness that settled like a fog. No music played, no service carts rolled. The usual rhythm of a long-haul flight, soft conversation, the hum of electronics, the rustle of blankets had gone silent. Even turbulence would have felt more natural than this. Passengers weren't asleep. They were watching the aisle, watching the galley, watching the closed cockpit door. Isaiah sat in his seat, shoulders back, hands resting on the armrests. His face was composed, unreadable. The only sound inside the cockpit was the soft beeping of instruments and the occasional whisper of air conditioning through the vents. Marcus broke the silence. "I don't know how you do that." Isaiah didn't look over. Do what keep your voice calm when someone's trying to provoke you in front of a full cabin. Isaiah gave a quiet breath. "It's not calm," he said. "It's calculation. If I lose my temper, I lose the narrative. And that's all they're waiting for." Marcus nodded slowly. "I've never seen a passenger challenge a captain like that before." Isaiah turned his gaze to the horizon. "You haven't flown enough. Back in the cabin." Zoe Landry had returned to her journal. She sat with her legs crossed, pen moving in steady loops across the page. Every so often, her eyes flicked upward, scanning the crew. Behind her, the man in 2B continued typing on his laptop. but more slowly now, as if each keystroke needed careful thought. Dalton remained in his seat, staring straight ahead. He hadn't touched the drink in his cup holder, hadn't pressed his call button, hadn't spoken to anyone since being ordered back to his seat. Something had shifted, not just in him, but in the air around him. The authority he once wore like a shield had cracked. And in that crack, the truth was showing. He wasn't used to being challenged, especially not by someone like Isaiah. Back in the galley, Lily leaned against the counter. Her hands were shaking slightly, but she took a deep breath and pulled herself upright. She glanced down the aisle toward Dalton, then turned to Olivia. "He can't just get away with that," Lily said quietly. Olivia didn't answer. She was watching the cabin, her arms folded, her mind clearly elsewhere. "I mean it," Lily continued. "If any of us had spoken to a passenger like that, we'd be fired, no questions asked." Olivia finally looked at her. "You're right." Lily blinked. "What you're right," Olivia said again, her voice tired but clear. "He crossed every line, and I let it happen, because I thought keeping him comfortable was more important than standing firm." Lily stared at her. Olivia reached for the cabin phone and called the cockpit. "Captain," she said, when Isaiah answered, "I'd like to formally report disruptive passenger behavior for Seat 2A. I'll document everything in the log and begin the post-flight report draft." Isaiah's voice came back. "Steady. Understood. I'll include it in the captain's flight notes." When the call ended, Olivia looked at Lily again. "You were braver than me," she said. Lily didn't respond, but the words stayed with her. "A few rows back in economy." Two passengers whispered quietly. "Was that the COO up there?" one of them asked. "Yeah," the other said. "Unbelievable." "Right. The way he spoke to that captain. I didn't expect the captain to push back." "Well, he did." The first man nodded. "Good for him." In the cockpit, Isaiah had his eyes closed. He wasn't asleep. He was rehearsing what would come next. When the plane landed, there would be questions. From the airline, from the press, if Zoe chose to write, from Dalton himself. There might be hearings. There might be pressure. There might be consequences. He had no illusions about how power protected itself. But for once, he wasn't afraid of the backlash. He was tired of pretending that professionalism meant silence, tired of being expected to absorb what others would never tolerate, tired of having to weigh whether his response would be seen as a reaction. He didn't regret what he said. He only regretted how long it took to say it. Marcus glanced at him again. "You think corporate will back you?" Isaiah didn't answer right away. "I think they'll do what's best for their image," he said. "What that looks like depends on who else decides to speak." Marcus nodded, then added, "I'll vouch for everything that happened." Isaiah looked at him, surprised. "You don't have to do that." "I know," Marcus said, "but I want to. For the first time since takeoff." Isaiah smiled. It was a small smile, but real. The silence continued in the cabin, but it was a different kind of silence now. Not fear, not shame, reflection. Passengers thought about what they'd seen. Some would forget by the time they landed, but others would carry it with them. A moment when the expected order shifted, when someone said no, when someone in a position of respect chose to defend it rather than defer. 10 minutes passed, then 11, 12. Gradually, the crew resumed movement. Lily began walking the aisle, checking seatbelts and comfort items. Chad remained near the rear galley, quiet, distant. Olivia walked down first class, taking trash, checking for requests. When she reached Dalton's row, she didn't speak. She didn't offer a drink. She didn't ask if he was comfortable. She simply nodded once, professionally, then continued past him. Dalton didn't say a word, didn't even look at her. Something in his face had shifted, not regret, but something close to recognition. He had lost control of the narrative. And the worst part was that everyone had seen it. As the cabin lights dimmed further for quiet rest, Zoe closed her journal, placed it gently in her bag, and reclined her seat. The captain's voice had been calm, but his message had echoed louder than any announcement. There are lines you do not cross, no matter how high you fly. The hum of the engines blended with the steady rhythm of thoughts inside Isaiah's head. The flight had entered its final third. 3 hours remained until descent into Munich. On the surface, everything had stabilized. The cabin lights were dimmed. Most passengers had reclined into a light sleep. The crew moved silently, doing only what was necessary. But Isaiah was wide awake. He leaned forward in his seat, opened the tablet mounted beside the throttle controls, and navigated to the flight log system. Each international flight required a formal record: technical performance, cabin events, delays, safety concerns. He tapped the menu labeled Crew Irregularities and began to type. First-class passenger in Seat 2A refused to comply with multiple crew instructions. Disrupted service protocol. Verbally challenged captain's authority in front of passengers and staff. Witnesses include flight attendants and passengers seated in rows 1 through 3. He paused. His fingers hovered over the screen. He considered the next sentence carefully. Passenger identified as Richard Dalton, Chief Operating Officer of Fenwick Aero Partners. Behavior deemed hostile, classist in tone, and potentially in violation of FAA 121-80 regulation. He exhaled slowly. He wasn't used to writing this kind of report, not because incidents never happened, but because so often they went undocumented, muted in favor of diplomacy, washed clean with excuses. We decided not to escalate. We just wanted to finish the flight. We didn't want drama. Isaiah had heard them all. For years. He looked at the timestamp. 2 hours and 58 minutes until touchdown. His hand hovered over the submit icon. He pressed it. The report uploaded to the airline's secure system. Duplicates would be sent automatically to operations, legal, and crew management teams. He knew that meant calls were coming, probably within hours of landing, maybe sooner. He sat back. That part was done. Now, the silence was his again. He glanced at Marcus, who had taken over the radios and was reviewing descent charts. "You document anything yet?" Isaiah asked. Marcus looked up. "Just started mine. I'm including witness statements, too." Zoe offered to give one directly. Isaiah nodded. "Good. Document everything. Use detail. They respect paper more than memory." Marcus hesitated. "You think they'll come after you for this?" Isaiah looked out the window. Moonlight streaked across the clouds like silver veins. "I think I just embarrassed someone powerful. That tends to provoke response." Marcus shook his head. "Seems backward." "You just enforced the rules." Isaiah smiled faintly. "Rules are only sacred until they inconvenience the wrong people." In the cabin, Zoe Landry was also working. Her tray table was down, her laptop open. The blue light from the screen cast a soft glow on her face. Her fingers moved with quiet precision, keys clicking like a heartbeat. She wasn't writing an article, not yet, not officially. She was making notes, timestamping details, cataloging expressions. Dalton's tone, when he said "born to lead." Chad's smirk when the meal was diverted. Olivia's moment of hesitation. Lily's quiet strength. The way Isaiah stood in the aisle, calm as steel, but unmistakably done with being overlooked. Zoe didn't need drama for a headline. She needed truth, and this flight was full of it. She saved the document, closed her laptop, and sat back. For now, the story could wait. 2 rows behind her, Dalton sat with his arms crossed, eyes closed, but not asleep. Every few minutes he shifted, repositioned his shoulders, flicked at his touchscreen. There was no grace in his stillness, no peace, just the tight discomfort of a man unaccustomed to being publicly corrected. Chad approached from the galley. "Would you like anything before landing?" "Mr. Dalton," he whispered. Dalton didn't answer right away. Then, quietly, he said, "Make sure that report doesn't leave this cabin." Chad hesitated. "I'm not sure we can stop that now." Dalton's eyes opened. "I'll make calls. There are ways. This will not be how people remember my name." Chad looked uneasy. For the first time, the cracks were reaching him too. Meanwhile, Lily stood near the economy curtain, watching everything. She had never felt this aware before, of where people stood, who looked away, who looked up, how certain passengers smiled only at specific crew, how others smiled at everyone. There was something in the silence that felt like truth finally surfacing. She stepped into the galley, poured herself a glass of water, and stood by the counter. Olivia joined her a moment later. "You good?" Olivia asked. Lily nodded, then added, "I didn't expect him to report it. Captain Thompson." "Yes." Olivia looked down. "He surprised me too." "He didn't raise his voice," Lily said. "He didn't even flinch." Olivia nodded. "That's why it worked." There was another pause. Then Lily asked, "Do you think he'll be punished for it?" Olivia didn't answer immediately, but when she did, her voice was clear. "If he is, then the airline will have more than one report to review." Lily looked at her, surprised, moved, and for the first time since takeoff, she smiled. In the cockpit, Isaiah watched the clouds shift. The moon had started its descent behind the Earth's curve. Morning was waiting on the other side. He tapped into the secure comms one more time, typed a new message. To Director of Flight Operations Subject Crew Conduct and Passenger Safety Report, Flight 701. He recapped the key events again, included crew names, noted Zoe's presence as a witness, attached flight log ID and GPS timestamp. At the end, he added one final line. This report is submitted with full responsibility and in alignment with FAA regulation and Northern Jet's stated values of safety, respect, and integrity. He hit send. Marcus leaned back in his chair. "You just dropped the anchor?" Isaiah nodded. "Let's see who tries to lift it." The cabin was still dark, but the glow of approaching dawn stretched like a thin line along the horizon. Outside, Europe was rising slowly into view. Inside, time had entered that strange space between night and morning, where silence feels heavier and truth starts to breathe louder. Isaiah kept his gaze fixed forward, but his thoughts were miles ahead of the aircraft. He knew it was only a matter of time. The report had been submitted. The decision made. The moment had passed, but the echoes were just beginning. He glanced at the system tablet. A ping appeared. Incoming message. Priority internal. It was short. Captain Thompson. Report received. Meeting scheduled for post-flight debrief. Stand by for next instructions. Flight ops. Marcus read over his shoulder. That didn't take long. Isaiah nodded. They're moving fast. In seat 2A. Dalton's eyes were wide open, despite the blanket draped over his lap and the seat reclined to maximum. His fingers gripped his phone, flipping through emails downloaded mid-flight. He couldn't connect to Wi-Fi this far over the continent, but that didn't stop him from preparing. He had already drafted 2 messages, one for the airline's executive team, one for the media just in case. His mind churned with phrases like misinterpretation and overreaction. He even considered using the word targeted. He had used it before. It worked well in high-stakes negotiations. Reversing blame was a dance he had mastered. Chad knelt beside his seat, whispering, "I don't think we're going to contain this." Dalton glared at him. "Then change the story." How Dalton leaned closer. "Zoe Landry is a reporter. If she writes this, the tone of her first paragraph will set the tone for the entire media cycle." Chad frowned. "You want me to talk to her?" Dalton's voice dropped. "Offer her something. Exclusive access. A quote. Play to her ego." Chad swallowed hard and stood, 2 rows forward. Zoe had just closed her eyes when she felt someone standing near. She opened them slowly. Chad was smiling, too friendly, too polished. "Ms. Landry," he said softly. "Mr. Dalton asked me to check if you'd be interested in speaking with him after landing. He would be open to giving you a statement." Zoe looked at him. Her expression didn't change. "Why would I want a statement?" Chad's smile twitched. "Well, I just thought, as a journalist, I'm not writing anything yet. But if you were, wouldn't it be fair to include both sides?" Zoe tilted her head slightly, both sides of what Chad hesitated, then said, "Just consider it." He walked away. Zoe didn't move for a moment. She could feel her heart beating faster. This was it. The moment when people try to steer the story before it even exists. She pulled out her phone, checked her notes, then began typing again. In the galley. Olivia was preparing the final beverage service when Lily entered. "Is it always like this?" Lily asked softly. Olivia raised an eyebrow. "Like what? Where a whole plane becomes a theater, and everyone's forced to choose sides." Olivia smiled faintly. "Not always. But when it happens, you remember every second." Lily looked toward first class. "I think we're going to remember this for a long time." By now, Isaiah had reviewed the landing approach twice. The descent checklist was ready. Weather in Munich was clear, light winds, no delays. Technically, the flight had been perfect, but no pilot would log this one as routine. Marcus turned in his seat. I heard Zoe turn down Dalton's offer. Isaiah didn't respond. Then he asked, "You think she'll write it?" Marcus shrugged. "I think she's already writing it in her head." Isaiah nodded. "If she does, the story won't be mine anymore." "You okay with that?" Isaiah looked out the window. "The truth doesn't need a steward. Back in first class." Zoe opened her journal again. This time, she wasn't taking notes. She was writing a title. She didn't know if she would use it, but it had formed in her mind the moment Isaiah stood his ground. She wrote, "When the captain says know what power looks like at 37,000 feet." She sat back, read the title again, then closed the book. Dalton noticed. His eyes narrowed. She met his gaze for one brief moment, then looked away. It was the kind of silence that said everything. In the rear of the cabin, passengers began waking, stretching, checking phones. Cabin lights brightened slightly. Olivia made a quiet announcement that breakfast would begin shortly. The mood had shifted again. Not tense, not calm. Anticipating. Isaiah tapped the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We're beginning our initial descent into Munich. Estimated arrival in 45 minutes. We thank you for flying with us." His voice was steady, professional. But to those who had witnessed the events of the past hours, Every word carried a deeper weight. Dalton reclined his seat back to upright, moving stiffly. Chad hovered nearby, no longer smiling. Lily walked down the aisle with quiet confidence. When she passed Isaiah's closed door, she paused for half a second. A quiet acknowledgement. Inside the cockpit, Marcus glanced at Isaiah. "You ready for what's waiting on the ground?" Isaiah responded without looking away from the windshield. "I've been ready for years." The approach began. Landing gear locked into position. Munich sparkled below. The cabin braced for touchdown. Everyone knew this flight would make the news, but not everyone knew which version would survive. The runway lights blinked in the distance, a calm row of stars leading the way. Isaiah guided the plane into descent with steady hands. The air traffic controller gave final clearance. The Dreamliner tilted slightly into its final approach. "Speed checks," Marcus called out. "Flaps set." Isaiah confirmed. Landing gear dropped. The wheels locked with a muted thud beneath the deck. Passengers buckled up. Seat backs clicked upright. The city of Munich sprawled below them like a canvas of light and fog. Cold morning air streaked the windows, but inside the cockpit, Isaiah was focused. No distractions, no tension now, just precision. The landing was smooth. Tires kissed the tarmac with a gentle grip. The fuselage rolled steadily down the runway, decelerating into a graceful taxi toward the arrival gate. Isaiah didn't speak as he rolled the aircraft to a stop. Parking brake engaged. "Flight 701 has arrived," he said into the intercom. Applause broke out in the rear of the cabin, not just for the landing, but for something more. A release of the pressure that had quietly filled the plane. Since cruising altitude, in first class. Dalton remained seated, jaw tight. He didn't clap. He didn't blink. He just stared forward, as if willing everything to move faster. Olivia stood in the galley, watching passengers gather their belongings. Lily collected trash from business class and avoided eye contact with Chad, who remained quiet, avoiding any tasks that required explanation. Marcus pulled off his headset. "They're waiting for you," he said. Isaiah nodded. "Flight ops." Marcus pointed toward the window. Outside the terminal, just past the gate, a black sedan was parked beside a van marked with the airline's emblem. 2 ground agents stood nearby. Isaiah could already imagine the conversation. Protocol, tone, media sensitivity, Dalton's version, his version, and then, somewhere in between, the story that would survive. But first, the passengers needed to disembark. Isaiah unlocked the cockpit door and stepped out. The cabin hushed as he entered. Passengers in the front rows turned to look. Some nodded, others smiled, and one Zoe stood up from her seat. "Captain Thompson," she said gently, "thank you for your professionalism today." Her voice was clear, loud enough for several rows to hear. Isaiah gave her a slight bow of the head. "You're welcome, ma'am. Safe travels." She looked him in the eye and added, "I won't forget this flight." Then she stepped off the plane, her carry-on in hand. A few passengers behind her echoed her sentiment. A quiet, "Thank you" here, a respectful nod there. Dalton remained seated. As Isaiah passed him, Dalton spoke without turning his head. "You've made a mistake." Isaiah paused. He didn't lean down. He didn't whisper. He simply replied, "So did you." Then he kept walking. Chad stood near the door. He looked pale, unsure whether to follow Dalton or distance himself. He opened his mouth, but Isaiah held up a hand. "I don't need an apology," Isaiah said. "I need you to ask yourself who you serve when no one's watching." Chad said nothing. Passengers filed out, one by one, then row by row. Soon, the cabin was empty. Only the crew remained. Olivia approached Isaiah near the galley. "Captain," she said quietly, "I spoke to Lily. We both plan to include statements in the report, independent and honest." Isaiah looked at her. "You're under no obligation to do that." "I know," she said, "but we saw what happened. We let it go too far. I won't do that again." He nodded once, then turned to Lily. She stepped forward. "I wasn't brave at first," she admitted, "but I want to be now." Isaiah's voice was calm, warm. "You were brave the moment you saw it wasn't right. Speaking after the fact still counts." Chad remained at the back of the galley, silent. He didn't speak, didn't offer help, didn't say goodbye. Isaiah let him stay in the silence. The gate crew entered. A uniformed officer was with them, along with a representative from airline security. "Captain Thompson," one said, "we'd like to speak with you and Mr. Dalton separately. Standard procedure." Isaiah nodded. He gathered his tablet and stepped off the aircraft. Outside, the wind was crisp. Airport staff moved around them with urgency, yet everything still felt suspended. Dalton was escorted to a private area of the terminal. Isaiah was led in the opposite direction. Inside a small operations office, 2 company reps were already seated. One was corporate legal, the other, flight director. They offered coffee. Isaiah declined. They reviewed the report he submitted in flight, asked follow-ups, requested clarifications, never raising their voice, never offering judgment, just writing things down. After 30 minutes, they closed their laptops. "Thank you, Captain. We'll be reviewing this with senior leadership immediately." Isaiah stood. "Before I go," he said, "I want to make something clear. I did what I was trained to do, protect the safety, respect, and authority of this crew. I would do it again." The flight director nodded slowly. "That's what we needed to hear." Isaiah left the office. Outside the terminal, the sky was pale gold, sunrise over the glass windows. Passengers moved like waves across the floor, unaware of what had unfolded in the air above them. He stood there for a moment, then took a deep breath. The flight was over, but the journey was not. 3 days had passed since Flight 701 touched down in Munich. Isaiah had returned home, but the story had not stayed behind. He stood in his kitchen, coffee mug in hand, watching the sunlight stretch across his countertop. His uniform hung neatly on a rack by the door. He hadn't been grounded, but he had voluntarily delayed his next assignment. He wanted to be present when the world made up its mind. On the marble island beside him, his phone buzzed again. Another news alert. He didn't have to check it to know what it was. The headline was everywhere now. "Captain takes stand at 37,000 feet. Executive's behavior sparks airline reckoning." The photo beneath it showed him standing in the aisle of the aircraft, arms behind his back, posture firm but composed. Zoe Landry's article had gone live just 36 hours ago. It had spread like wildfire. She hadn't sensationalized the story. She didn't need to. She let the facts breathe. She quoted multiple passengers, described the imbalance of the situation, the denial of a simple meal, the coded language, the power plays, the silent looks, the shift in atmosphere. She quoted Isaiah's exact words. "This is not about hills. This is about altitude." She didn't need to explain the metaphor. Everyone understood it. By morning, social media had filled with clips from passengers who had recorded the scene. Edited montages of Isaiah's calm authority spread across platforms. TikTok, Instagram, newsreels. Captain Thompson trended for 24 hours straight. Celebrities reposted the story. Pilots and flight attendants wrote their own testimonies of incidents they had buried in silence. Passengers shared their stories of bias in the air. By day 2, the airline issued a statement. Northern Jet is committed to maintaining a flight environment where every crew member and passenger is treated with respect. We have opened a formal internal review. Captain Thompson remains in active service and is not under disciplinary action. By day 3, Richard Dalton resigned. He didn't call it that. He called it a transition. A statement was released. He thanked his team, cited personal reflection, avoided specifics, but the world knew. You don't resign in silence if you were the victim. Zoe's second article focused on the aftermath. She interviewed Olivia, who confirmed the internal report. Lily, too, who shared how the experience changed her understanding of courage. Even Marcus gave a quote. "I've flown for 10 years. I've never seen someone command a moment like Captain Thompson did. He didn't just land the plane. He landed a message. Isaiah didn't speak to any reporter. He didn't need to. The story had already told itself. He returned to work on the 4th day. The airport felt different. Not louder. Not busier. Just different. People nodded as he walked past. Ground crew smiled a little longer. A flight attendant he had never met said thank you. He stepped into the crew briefing room for his next long-haul flight and found Lily already seated. She stood as he entered. "Captain, Lily, I'm on your crew again." Isaiah smiled. "Good to hear. I wanted to tell you something," she said. "I almost quit. Before that flight." Isaiah looked at her. "Why?" "Because I thought I didn't belong. That no matter how well I performed, I'd always be overlooked. I didn't think the system could ever change." Isaiah nodded slowly. "What changed your mind?" "You," she said. "That moment in the aisle. You didn't yell. You didn't threaten. You just made it stop." And that was the first time I saw a leader who didn't need to be loud to be heard. Isaiah was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Thank you. That means more than you know." As they walked to the gate, Olivia joined them. She too looked different, straighter, lighter. The team boarded early. Pre-flight checks began. Passengers trickled in. Some recognized him. A few whispered, but no one interrupted. Halfway through boarding, a young man approached him. He wore a university sweatshirt and carried a book in his hand. "Excuse me, Captain. Yes, I just wanted to say, I'm studying aviation. I read about what happened. It made me feel like I have a place in this field." "Thank you?" Isaiah smiled. He looked down at the book. It was a biography of Bessie Coleman. "You picked a good one," he said. The young man nodded and returned to his seat. Later, as the doors closed and the flight prepared for takeoff, Marcus turned to him again. "You think they'll remember this next year?" Isaiah didn't answer right away. Then he said, "They don't have to remember me. They just have to remember what it looked like when someone said enough." As the plane ascended into the sky once more, Isaiah felt the same stillness in the cockpit. But it no longer felt like silence. It felt like peace. Not because the world had changed, but because he had. And maybe that was how change really began. One person, one flight, one refusal to sit quietly. As the cabin doors slide open and the applause fades, we're left with more than a tale of a shattered champagne flute. We're reminded that even in the most controlled environments where every procedure is scripted, prejudice can find its way aboard. Yet, it only takes one person of integrity, one refusal to stay silent, to spark change that echoes beyond the metal walls of an airplane. Captain Isaiah Thompson's stand teaches us to honor our shared humanity, to uplift those who have been overlooked, and to call out discrimination wherever it hides. Let his story inspire you when respect is questioned. Speak up. When justice seems distant, lean in. If this journey moved you, show your support by liking this video, sharing it with friends, and subscribing for more stories that matter. Your engagement helps us keep these conversations alive, so stay with us, because the next powerful narrative is just a click away.